There were, at a minimum, 22 books that were taken out of the ancient Bible. There were very, very many scriptures in the Bible that are not considered canonic. Now, a lot of this started with Hosea and all of the people that wrote those law-oriented books in the Bible, such as Deuteronomy. And what they were on about was making sure to create a monotheistic patriarchal faith with the Bible as their central teaching. Things were really bastardized, really rewritten, really taken out of context. A lot of things were, like we said, taken out of the Bible completely. The Bible in and of itself comes from a time and a place where things are very symbolically written to begin with. So it's already hard and difficult to understand the occult truths in the Bible. You've heard that saying that history is written by the winners. Well, the winners were those Hosea scribes and prophets and priests, hell-bent on stamping out the goddess, stamping out the pluralistic worship that were going on. Because remember, those ancient Israelites were not monotheistic. Many of them used Yahweh, which was their tribal god, as sort of like the chairman of the board. So they would maybe pray to a single deity, understanding that deity would then be working with other deities within its board of directors, so to speak. Many, and even earlier versions of the Israelites were very polytheistic, and they all worshipped a goddess. And remember, Asherah was the goddess, the consort of Yahweh. So there was a god and a goddess, and there was a host of angelic beings. There was no monotheism, and there was definitely no patriarchy until there was. Until there was. But you can look at the history behind it, and you can see where that Bible was completely decimated. But they couldn't decimate all of it, and all of the Apocrypha that was taken out of the Bible is now, much of it having been discovered, is readable. So we can kind of start to put two and two together and see what's what. And that's what we're going to do today. So we're literally searching the scriptures to see what's going on from a magical point of view rather than a religious point of view. So remember, it's all mythology, it's all lore in the Bible. Everything is symbolic, very, very symbolic. It's never smart to look at the Bible as a piece of history. Now, you can look at historical data, surrounding the Bible, absolutely, but to consider that story was supposedly written as history, I can't believe they still teach such things. There's so many disparate sources, so many disparate scribes, many different generations, different times, different places, all kinds of different stuff that was compiled, and then much of it rewritten to conform to what was going on with Hosea and his scribes and his prophets and priests to bring about this strange new thing, this patriarchy, this monotheism. Remember that back in the day, religious law was the law. Even before all of that Reformation and things like that, there was more of a primitive sort of faith. Those old cultures, their law came from their faith. They didn't have a separation of church and state like we do. Everything was coming from the clergy of the time. When you were in trouble with the law, you were not tried by civil courts like we have now. You were tried by temple courts. And judgment was given according to religious or magical law based on what they felt the Creator had given. Because back then, all monarchy, etc., was considered to be God-given. All of that to say that a lot of these writings that we look at in the Bible, you have to look at them in that context and understand that they hearken back to an older version of themselves, but many of them have been bastardized and rewritten, and we don't have access until we have new archaeological digs to unearth more original versions of these texts. We don't have access to those texts, so we really have to be investigative when we read them. All right, so in the Garden of Eden story, you will read that there were 4 rivers that branched out from Eden, that watered the Garden of Eden, and they branched out. They went to the north, the south, the east, and the west. And each one of those rivers, from an occult point of view, would have represented one of the 4 elements: air, fire, earth, and water. And all of the elements are what we consider containing life on this earth, in the physical earth. And so that was true in some form or another long before Pythagoras, long before a lot of the classical understandings of those 4 elements. There was always some form of that. When you look at that story and you see Adam and Eve, remember that there were 2 creation myths. One where it was the creation of the soul, and then the one with the garden and the serpent and all of that was the creation of the body and the ego. Now, if you look at the creation of Adam and Eve in that story, and you consider it not so much that they were created one day, but it's depicting an evolution, evolutionary creation of those bodies and of that race of human beings. So the souls were created long, long before the bodies were. So the one creation myth was talking about the soul, and the other creation myth is talking about the evolution of the bodies, how we evolved so that we could house those souls here on earth. In that regard, once there was a split of those 2 genders here on earth, you could consider Adam as being just representing all male bodies, and Eve as representing all female bodies. As souls, if you will remember the other story, they were created as male and female, each one, male and female. The souls were pre-gender. It was only through those evolutionary bodies that the gender got split, and that's that story of Adam being put to sleep and then Eve coming out of the rib. So the children of Adam and Eve mated, and then they each went into their own direction. They made their homes on the banks of one of those 4 rivers. And those represent the coming forth of the manifestation of people. And you recognize that everything, according to occult lore, comes under some sort of planetary rulership. There's history of that throughout all occultism. Each of those sub-races of humans were under planetary rules based on which river they went to. So that could be said the Eastern River represented air signs. You could say that the Southern River represented fire signs. You could say that the Western River represented water signs, and you could say that the Northern River represented earth signs. And that's how we look at it. And it works great. It says that Cain went east of Eden. So he was on the Eastern River. The story of Cain and Abel is a very important occult myth, and there's many versions of this story of the 2 brothers fighting. It's a solar myth. It's an ancient solar myth representing the seasons. Now, Abel, if you look at his name, it represents somebody that understood only the letter of the law, only the letter of things, but not the spirit of it. Abel represented the waning year. Abel represented the sun god that was waning and that was losing his power, whereas Cain represented the spirit of the law and the sun god that was gaining his power. And so that's why Cain slew Abel, just like in any of those other solar myths, was to perpetuate life. It was to keep the wheel spinning, it was to keep the seasons going. Now, and so he was sent east of Eden. And when you think of east, that's following the sun. That's following the sun. So the so-called death of Abel was just an allegory for the death of the solar power at the autumn equinox. Now, it's interesting because the twins, Cain and Abel, could represent Gemini. But back in those days, remember that Gemini represented the spring equinox. When the twin of Gemini slew his brother, he was slaying Libra, the air sign that was farther along in the year. And again, That was just as a myth to perpetuate that wheel of life around and around and around. We have many versions of the two brothers fighting in order to keep the son alive. When Cain got killed, it was by a guy named Lamech, who was an archer, who accidentally shot Cain in the eye. And Lamech was one of Cain's descendants. Now that is obviously coming from Sagittarius. Cain was a Gemini subject. So it's interesting to start thinking in terms of what these things mean astrologically. If you think about those four rivers now, that was just a little aside, but if you think of those four rivers, the fixed sign of each of those four rivers, you could say, is the parent of that river. And then the other two signs are children of that river. You can look in your own chart and see, first of all, what's my sun sign? What's my moon sign? Well, what elements are those? And you can see the primary rivers that you exist in. As a pilgrim out of Eden, where are you headed? Where are you going? What kind of magic is native to you? But you can also take a look at your birth chart and just tally up all the planets and say, well, which is the winner? Well, that's going to be my primary river. And then what's the next element? That's my secondary river, etc. And you can understand a lot about yourself based on what rivers you are native to. For instance, the parent of the eastern river is Aquarius. That's ruled by Ariel. And then you've got those other two signs there. You've got Gemini and Libra. So then you've also got Raphael and Anael. So you've got Uriel, Raphael, and Anael, all ruling that eastern river. Now, the old ancient ruler of Aquarius was Cassiel. So there you got a number 4 in there. So you got 4 angels ruling that eastern river. Over in the south, you've got the primary parent of that river is Leo. So that's the sun rules the south. But then you also, and that's Michael. But then you also have Sagittarius, and you've got Aries. So you've got Samael and Sachiel also that are ruling that southern river. The western river, the fixed sign of that is Scorpio. So Samael is the primary parent of the western river. In addition to Scorpio, we've got Cancer, which is Gabriel the moon, and we've got Pisces, which is Sachiel, but also Asariel, which we haven't really talked about too much. And we'll talk about that angel more, as well as Azrael. So we've got those rulers in the west. Now over in the north, the fixed sign of the north is Taurus. And so that's Anael ruling that river as the parent. But then we also have Capricorn, which is Cassiel. And we've got Virgo, which is Raphael. So we've got archangels ruling each of those 4 rivers, and we can see which of those rivers we are native to based on our birth charts. When you understand those 4 rivers as being part of the magic that flows into each of those elements according to the zodiacal signs, then you can start to look at, well, in the Bible, what does it say? God said, "Let there be light." Well, what is light? How does light manifest for us? Well, light manifests usually in color. So one of the highest ways of understanding power as light is color. And each color represents a different aspect of divinity. And that's called the glory of God. There's a glory of angels. I know we say a choir. There is an older collective noun, and that is a glory of angels. So we look at the glory of God, meaning the angelic host. That's what the glory of God is. Because remember, God is not a male. That came way, way later. That was a political hit job, the whole patriarchy thing. But the truth of it is that the creator is pre-gender, and the glory of that God, the glory of that creation is the multiplicity, which is also where that polytheism was a definite part of the ancient Israeli practice. The ancient Hebrews practiced that. But they came from the idea that it comes from a central unified source. So we can use those colors as a means by which to identify which angels and which rivers something is vibrating to when you're dealing with things like crystals and stones and candles and flowers and plants and all kinds of ways that colors manifest in the world. And you can remember in your correspondences, if you've taken the basic angel magic course, how different colors vibrate to different angelic spheres. And so that's a way for us to categorize, that's our type of Kabbalah, to categorize where those colors are vibrating so that we understand how we can use things like flowers and plants and stones and gems and crystals and things like that in our magic, how we can use them in our magic. Now, for your own signs, what's an interesting way to work with the rivers and when you're dealing with colors is, let's say, let's just use me as an example. So for Ariel is usually either multicolored or electric blue. That's usually what Ariel is. So I've got Ariel for my rising sign and my moon sign, and then I've got Samael for my sun sign. And so if I was to blend that red with those two electric blues, I'd get a type of violet color. And that I could consider my personal color. I could consider that my quote lucky color, if you will. Now, so when you start to combine those colors in certain ways for yourself, you can create your own lucky color, your own personal vibrational color. Maybe you have Cancer sun, and maybe you have Gemini moon. When you add yellow of Gemini with the white of Cancer, you come up with that real pale yellow. Or maybe that yellow and blue you want to mix together, because sometimes Cancer is seen as blue and that becomes more of a pale green. You can play with that. You can get some paints or some inks. Watercolors are great, and start to blend those colors little by little, gently, and see what kind of beautiful colors you can come up with. And then that you can use for your own personal magic, personal talismans, finding gems that match as closely as possible those colors that you have combined to make a new color. It's a very powerful magical exercise to find your own personal color based especially on those three signs, sun, rising, and moon, but mostly sun and moon, because that's your primary and your secondary birth angel, and how they work together is how those colors combine. And that's definitely a working of this idea of those four rivers of Eden. No matter what your magical river is or are, everybody has an affinity to the Eastern River. Everybody does. In many, many faiths, it is taught that we orient ourselves to the East. We pray to the East, we face the East for many different things. And that is because when you face to head toward the sun, the rising sun, that is as if you are facing the rising light. And that's why a lot of the ancient people said that from the east comes the light. The eastern rivers became, we could say, the first priests and kings of the world, because they were considered to, remember, be the sun god in person. All monarchs were considered to be chosen by the deity. So those kings were seen to be the deity on earth. And that's why when Cain was supposedly gone east of Eden, the ancient occult secrets stay hidden because they're put in stories. When Cain went east of Eden, a lot of people thought he was there because he was being punished by God for slaying Abel, because that's sort of what it says in the Bible. But if you look under the surface, actually what's going on is Abel needed to be slain because Abel was the shell of knowledge with no spirit. And when Abel was slain, then that meant that the sun got strength, and he had to go eastwards, because that's where he was going to be shown every day, where you will see Cain coming up every morning. And so he was going toward occult knowledge. He was going toward wisdom. And all of his descendants, the children of Cain, were occultists, were considered to be the carriers of the ancient wisdom. Because Cain wasn't a murderer, Cain was a character in an ancient solar myth and was actually the victor responsible for the sun staying alive, according to the ancient myths. So you will find that story, like I said before, of those twin brothers fighting throughout almost every religion. So no matter what sign you're born under, no matter what your rivers are, you are also traveling east of Eden when you are trying to find occult wisdom and occult knowledge. And you are always trying to slay your brother Abel anytime you're trying to overcome your lower nature, overcome that which is worn out and no longer appropriate for you. You want to slay that part of yourself so that you can move to the east and get more and more wisdom, more and more wise. So you understand how a lot of people think that Abel was the victim of the story and Cain was just horrible and was then just put into exile. But no, God put a mark on Cain in order so that nobody could hurt Cain, so that when Cain went east of Eden, Cain could continue his work unfettered. And that's what you are when you are searching for occult knowledge. And that's what we're doing together, is we're searching for occult knowledge so that we can become wiser. And therefore, you have the mark of Cain on your brow or on your body. And that's why you are going to be protected so that you can continue your work here to go east of Eden in order to find and maintain that occult knowledge, always rising higher and higher, and always learning that it's important that you slay Abel, you slay that lower nature in order to keep you moving forward toward the east. So no matter what of the other 4 rivers that are chosen in your chart, that eastern river is always the first river that you always want to think of when you're working this kind of magic. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Until next time, blessed be.